Morning, everyone. How is everybody? Breakfast is good. Breakfast is still in the works for many of you. I think this is going to be a really exciting session. So for some of you, I know it's a challenge. It felt like a little bit of an icebreaker exercise for you to walk in at 7 o'clock in the morning and be given a little pile of Lego and to try to figure out what to do with it with very few instructions. But what you're going to find out is a little bit about yourselves today based on that exercise. So some of you, you found out you're technically challenged. The bag was a problem. All right? So your children would have already completed it, been playing with it, gotten bored with it, and yet you're still trying to get into your little baggie of goodies. For some of you, the first thing you said is, are everyone's toys the same? Okay, so equity is a big concern for you, obviously. Okay, how come theirs is blue? My favorite color is blue, and I got an orange one, and it's not Halloween yet. So what you find out in an exercise like this, and it isn't an icebreaker exercise, it wasn't designed to put you with a group of people you don't know and to get you working together. That's not the point. What the point of this exercise is to give you the first sort of insight into what it is that we do at the School of Business, which is not play, but is getting people to change their mindset. So our version of entrepreneurial thinking is all about changing the minds of our students and ultimately changing the minds of some of the people who will ultimately become your employees. So what we're going to talk a little bit about today is where does this entrepreneurial mindset fit into the business school culture? So how do we go from managers and strategists to training legions of students to become your employees who are more entrepreneurial oriented? Now, for some of you, that may sound scary. It may sound like we're training entrepreneurs, which is probably the worst kind of employee you would ever have, because they're going to come, learn everything about you, do it better than you do, and compete with you. Well, that's not what we're doing. We're training individuals, so those students who have a desire, a capacity, and an interest find a home at the Haskayne School of Business or in business schools, because in many business schools, we really don't talk about entrepreneurship, and we don't talk about small business. We talk about big business, and we do cases and exercises and projects in big business space. And there's obviously a need for big business, but if you look at the economy is prompted up and definitely downturns by entrepreneurial individuals and entrepreneurship itself. So what we want to talk about is, well, where does this fit and how do we do this? Well, the exercise that you had in front of you was one of the exercises that we might do with a class. I want you to appreciate that entrepreneurship and innovation is one of our 3 strategic pillars at the School of Business, but entrepreneurial thinking is actually what we teach and what we do. So this year, for the first time, we will have over 700 undergraduate students taking a required course in entrepreneurial thinking at the second year of their program, and we're super excited about that. And they do exercises very much like the bricolage exercise you did. What we're hoping is some of you kind of got the tongue-in-cheek nature of today, which is we had you playing with bricks, Lego bricks, while you were doing a bricolage exercise. So if some of that was lost on you, maybe it was a little too subversive for 7 o'clock in the morning. However, we do things like this in class because what we're trying to do is get students to move beyond creativity and into innovation, which is purposeful creativity with an outcome. And today, my brother from another mother, Michael, is going to come up and talk to you because literally it's like having somebody who is practical and has a very thriving business and is an entrepreneur who really is living what happens in my head every single day, which is, I wonder how I could do this, I wonder how I could do this, and he's living it, and he's going to talk to you about how he creates an entrepreneurial culture in his organization. And what I'm going to spend a couple minutes is talking about how do we do this with students and why is it so different than what most business schools would do. So we talk about an entrepreneurial mindset. Without the right mindset, without the right capacity, without persistence, perseverance, and passion, students are not going to ever pursue this notion of entrepreneurship. It's just not going to be in their DNA. So we need to be able to give them not only the tools and the skills and the knowledge, we need to create this mindset, an attitude of action orientation. And some of you, if you're old enough and experienced enough, we used to use words like self-starter. Okay? Self-starters, those people are entrepreneurial oriented. They have an entrepreneurial mindset. So an entrepreneur, though, is somebody who takes resources, constrained and limited resources, and today's exercise was about constraint. Some of you had only 62 pieces, and the groups that had 72 pieces are so excited that you had 10 more pieces to work with. And some of you just put 12 on the floor and said, we only had 40 because we couldn't build anything with the 62 that we had. So for this exercise, you were constrained with respect to resources, you were constrained with respect to time, and some of you, the people sitting at the table was a constraint. Some of you wanted to play Red Rover and call over somebody who was better at this than you were at your particular table. So that whole notion of constraint is what entrepreneurs deal with every day. Most of us could create a business with hundreds of millions of dollars. We would probably spend 99 of those $100 million, waste most of it, but we would keep the thing going. But an entrepreneur is somebody who takes no money, your money, someone else's money, and no resources and no space and turns it into a viable business. We want our students to understand that. And finally, you have to have a market. You have to know what the opportunity is. So in this exercise, we asked you to come up with a valuable product, service, something that would have a cultural difference, make a cultural difference or an economic difference. So what we're interested in is, can you convert almost nothing into something of great value? So David's Table. David's Table came up with this idea of a hovercraft for the oil patch that would ultimately be able to get you into spring breakup or out of spring breakup more quickly. So I'm not sure I did it justice, but they're already looking for capitalization. RBC should come and meet with them. They've got this awesome idea. For the RBC table, not surprisingly enough, they looked at this and said each one of these has value, and they created a new monetary system with it, and so it's money. All right, so if you're looking to have a new medium of exchange, I'm not sure we needed one, but if we needed one, maybe Quebec is looking for one or something perhaps, but if you're looking at this, there's an opportunity, there's a new monetary system created. So with no time and no money and very few resources, people are creating these value-oriented products and services. And that's really what the goal of this is, to get you to think outside of yourself. So instead of your day-to-day grind, we open up your mind. We allow you to do things which, A, might appear fun, but ultimately have purpose. So most of us in our lives, and those of us who went through business school training, were trained as managers. We have a skill set. We're accountants or finance or marketing people. Some of us might have even been trained as entrepreneurs. And so that we would refer to as the managerial mindset or managerial thinking. Somebody tells us what to do. That's the ends. Grow a business, 14% return on investment, expand into a new country, and then they give us a budget and people and they tell us what to do. And so for some of you, the first thing you did is you opened the instructions in this exercise, just like Emmett from the Lego movie, and some of you now are starting to see the theme, the Everything is Awesome song, which came from the Lego movie. Oh yeah, now I remember it, and your kids sang it for 6 months solid. Okay? Hopefully it sticks in your head and you're going to recall that. So Emmett followed the instructions, wasn't much of a builder. He certainly wasn't a master builder. But that's what most of us do. We're managers. Okay? In the business school, we're really good at this. We do an excellent job of teaching people how to be managers. We have accounting courses and finance courses. We're also pretty good at teaching people how to be strategists. So there's a desired end. There are certain means. There's a little bit of creativity and a little recombination of resources to be able to get the most out of people. And this is where we talk about effectiveness and efficiency. And President Business from the Lego movie was all about efficiency, to the point, if you recall the movie, those of you who saw it, he wanted to glue things down because they were perfect. Like, let's just lock this down. Now, some of you are in this room are sort of at the opposite end of the entrepreneurial thinking continuum. You're the process people. So let's inculcate what doesn't need to be done in the first place, and let's put a process into place to make sure that it lives on ad infinitum, ad nauseum, forever and ever and ever, because there's a process. So let's actually constrain all innovation, and let's constrain creative thinking by putting in all of these processes. Now, that's not to say they're not needed. We need good processes to make sure that our salespeople get their expense reports in on time and get them paid. They want to get their money back. All of us want our expenses paid quickly. All of us want to get a paycheck, right? The first time we know that something's wrong is we didn't get a paycheck, like that Office movie where, right, that I haven't had a paycheck for a long time, right, for 6 months or something, and then we know maybe we were fired and they just didn't tell us. So, and I may be now, I'm not really sure. So, By the way, I could use some of that money. No, if you think about this, we are really good at effectiveness and efficiency, but effectiveness and efficiency isn't necessarily growth. It's about bottom line dollar management, but we may miss all the great opportunities that are out there. In contrast, entrepreneurial thinking is where we have these constrained means. We have a limited budget. We have limited time. We have limited resources, just like the Lego exercise that you engaged in. But we have limitless possibilities. Nobody told you that you had to make the thing that was presented to you. Nobody told you that you had to follow the instructions. Nobody told you you had to use all the pieces. So I will share with you what other people might do, and then you're going to share with us some of the other tables near the end, because I know you're going to want to share what your value proposition was. But we've had people in an exercise like this, in not much more than 15 minutes, do nothing but pick the eyeball out of the Lego group, okay, and the EMBA students who are here going, yeah, we know what that's all about, right? Pull the eyeball out and go, this is our idea. You're like, what, the eyeball, what's that all about? We think that Lego should come up with a brand of glasses and that they're customizable, and so that you can put your initials on the side of your glasses because they have the Lego thing. Now, is that a brand new to the world idea? Anyone who's ever seen an ugly pair of Crocs and has put the little beads in them has said, that's the same thing, it's just on your face. That's the only difference. But Crocs, that's a large business, right? And whether they're popular today or not popular, it was pretty explosive in lots of stores and lots of sales. So it doesn't mean that you have to use all the bricks. It just means that you have the capacity to be able to imagine a new future, to examine what could be, not what is. And that's what we're trying to train our students to do. We're training our students to be opportunity identifiers, not just opportunists, but to be able to see opportunity, to be value seekers. We're interested in them understanding what it is to think like an entrepreneur versus a banker. And there is a difference. There's studies about how different people perceive risk differently. And we're just trying to expose all of our students to this. So this year, as I said, we have 700 undergraduate students. We have almost 100 graduate students. We have people in our custom and in our open executive education programs all acquiring this new skill set. And for many people, what they would think is, well, can you teach us how to do this? Well, certainly we believe we can teach undergraduates and graduates and executive education. We believe that we can teach people how to become more entrepreneurial. But at the same time, I think what's important is to appreciate that entrepreneurial thinking is a culture. And our guest speaker today is going to be talking about how his company embraces this notion about entrepreneurial thinking and has basically not just embodied this spirit, but is inculcated into their processes and their systems, and what we're going to hear about is how do they actually live this every single day? So how do you turn a creative company into an extremely innovative and successful organization? So entrepreneurial thinking is about maximization of cultural, social, environmental, economic value through any means. It's not just about new products. It could be new processes, new business models. And that's the goal, is to become more innovative in everything we do to maximize the value and the return. For some people, that means true entrepreneurship. For other people, it's the individuals in their organization who are going to be more entrepreneurial in orientation. So I can't tell you, now just go do this, because we haven't taught you enough. So instead of just telling you to go be creative, what we're going to hear is how you can be creative. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael Sikorsky. I'd like you all to welcome him up to the stage, CEO of Robots and Pencils. And we're going to hear how some of you are very robotic in your approach to Lego, and how some of you are more pencil-oriented in your approach to Lego. Please welcome Michael Sikorsky.
Well, thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here today. Like Derek said, I'm kind of like the case study, right? So we're going to kind of lift up the hood inside Robots and Pencils and kind of tell you like why we cared about entrepreneurial thinking, because really until I met with people at the Hunter Center at the Haskayne School, I didn't even know like that's what it was called, right? I was like, oh, okay, that's actually what we do, and that you'll realize that we learn that a lot, right? And so what I wanted to start with was this quote about the universe tends towards maximum irony, because actually people will talk about me as an entrepreneur, but actually I'm actually way more into entrepreneurial thinking, because when you actually stop and you unpack everything, this is how I feel like what really happens in the startup land is that when you begin your company, it's so exciting, I can't believe it, barbecue, t-shirts, everything. And then you go into years of the trough of sorrow. And in that trough of sorrow, I think it's really, really painful. And I think a lot of people forget that because only people get to kind of talk on stage are people who've kind of made it. So there's a survivorship bias. There's a lot of like pain that happens in the trough of sorrow. But if you think about all the amazing businesses that are here in Calgary, people have such a great platform. And this platform for entrepreneurial thinking can be totally unleashed, right? So this is where I got so passionate about what's happening at Haskayne and the Hunter Center around this. And so why? Like, why did this happen at Robots and Pencils? Why did we care about this stuff? Why did we start thinking about entrepreneurial thinking? Well, actually, when I started the company, I really cared about what would it look like if we were here in 100 years, right? So the very first thing we thought about was we're never for sale. We're never, for example, going to have equity investors. We're never going to have debt. Sorry, RBC. So this whole idea was because this way we're so safe, right? It means that we could look a little slow. We could look a little pokey. We could be in our little basement in our house for a while, which we were for years. But the whole point was that we were trying to think about how we're going to be here in 100 years. How do we have this legacy company? I actually think about 1,000 years, but that really freaks people out, so I say 100. And that's because everything has to repeat, right? So for sure, I'm not going to be around. And then all the next generation of all the team that are on the staff have to actually generate the business from scratch all the time. We have to repeat ourselves all the time. So today we make apps. Talk to us in 50 years, unlikely. It's actually very unlikely, right? So everything has to repeat. So we can't have this batch of well, we invented something, and then now it was invented. So here I'm Thomas Edison, and then now I'm going to create General Electric. I'm going to distribute it forever, right? And then have to have an innovation process. In our mind, we're saying, how do we just have this happen all the time? And so one of the things that we realize is this fundamental thing that we believe helps bootstrap a business is you actually have to have a secret that very few people agree with you on, right? And so I'll give you an example of one of Robots and Pencils was that we believe that building a native mobile application was going to slaughter all the web applications. Now, rewind back to 2008. That's crazy talk, right? If you're in technology business. Today, it's still crazy, but less crazy. But think about that, we're 5 years ahead, 6 years ahead of where anybody else is. And that's one of our truths that no one actually agreed with us on. And so a couple more other ones was that this is a Clay Christensen quote. I love him. He's a great, great, great business thinker. And he talks about how the next big thing always is dismissed as a toy. And if you even go back and imagine mobile and the iPhone, you can imagine how no one thinks it's going to be a powerful business tool. There's no way you think about that. In fact, when your kids have it, it's can you get that device away from you? This is a distraction. This is an entertainment piece where actually this seems to happen all the time on every innovation, right? That's the first phase it goes through, right? So when a whole bunch of people think it's a joke and no one's agreeing with you, we kind of think, oh, aha, that's the secret sauce. Now we know to explore that space, right? So you have to get that into people's minds in the business. The other thing that's actually unconventional, I think, for us is that we actually ask every person, every one of our talented team members, please give us 10 years. We actually want 10 years from you. Because actually, what you can get done in a year, everyone overestimates. What you can get done in 10, everyone underestimates. And if we have this long-term planning, I can promise everything to that person. I can say, tell me what you want in your job. There's no way I can't say yes to you if you give me 10 years. I make everything happen. What can you not make happen? It's 10-year plan. There's too much space in the globe to not even let someone be okay, you go open up Asia next, right? There's nothing that we can't say yes to. And so we also believed was that there's no more B2C or B2B. It's all just human to human, which is the whole approach we take as basically software builders. We don't care that the software is supposed to go to your staff or the software is supposed to go to your clients. Software. And then this is kind of this is probably the other deepest belief was that actually when you separate the scientists and humanities into two separate cultures, weird stuff happens. So this is C.P. Snow. He gave a Reed lecture in 1959, so this is very old thinking, about how all the world's problems are from this idea that we used to be one culture and we've now really separated into the scientists and humanities. And we actually want to push them back together. In fact, his book became one of the top 100 post-war books. So this is a very old idea. But if you actually unpack it for us, that's the exact thing that we called Robots and Pencils. So basically, if the robot side, you're a scientist. If you're on the pencil side, you're a humanities person. And so actually our name basically takes that truth and sticks it in there. So nobody does anything that doesn't mix a scientist with a humanities person. There's no like science team and then a humanities team. There's just robots and pencils people together. So how do we do this? Lauren mentioned this idea of the chemistry lab that blows up. We think about the talent, okay? So the talent, what we try to do with the talent is let them have chances to make mistakes, right? Because if you think about it as an entrepreneur, by the time people start joining you, well, actually, they haven't seen what it looks like in the beginning of the startup. There's this great story about SAP, a software company. Someone goes and writes a book about them, and they actually go, well, the first 12 years, nothing interesting happens. We're just going to start 12 years in. And if you actually think about teaching people stuff, actually, all those mistakes in the beginning of the business is the stuff that they have to learn. So we actually have to let people make all these mistakes all the time. That's the only way that they grow. And we call it FTT, or follow the talent. We actually have to follow the talent, see where they're going to lead us. That's the whole point. And the way we actually think about that is that the company's now a reverse pyramid, right? So the talent's at the top and management's at the bottom. And we're actually coaches, right? And so even if we think that they're going to hurt themselves, like the firecracker's going to blow up, we're like, just let it blow up. Like, hey, if you're sure you want to let that happen, that's okay. Because now you're going to be really strong, because they have to own that decision. David Lynch, a great director, I think anyways, he did the Dune movie, and he didn't get final edit. And so he always talks about how painful that was to him, because Dune wasn't a success. But he didn't get final edit, so actually that wasn't his work. So our point is, we actually give everyone final edit. Hey, this was our idea, and we think you maybe want to change this tagline, but if you don't want to, that's okay. There's a real-world example from yesterday. You just go with it, right? And I love this quote, is that everyone has talent. What is rare is the courage to follow the talent to the dark place where it leads. And if you think about it as a business person, this is crazy talk, right? We're actually saying, let the capital planning and the capital projects happen from the talent, right? And so it's actually scary. It is very dark. In fact, for example, our president, who really cares about operations, hates this whole talk, hates that we do this, doesn't like this at all, right? But it's too bad, right? That's how it goes. And so actually how we think about this is our innovation hourglass, right? And so that's why there's a stick of dynamite in the innovation hourglass, is that this whole point is that we know you're going to make mistakes. It's actually the whole point. The whole point is you're going to blow stuff up. And all we try to do is basically help guide you through different levels of capital, right? We just say, well, you don't have to talk to us at all if you have got firecrackers. Well, maybe as you're going down deeper, maybe you're getting more people working on your project, maybe we should talk a little bit more. Now maybe you're going to give you some dynamite, and it just basically grows that way. So this is the way that we kind of manage it, and we call it guilty until proven innocent, the guppy model or whatever. And I'll give you a real-world example of that. This is our next product that we're launching. It's called Pencil Case. It lets anyone build an app. So you don't actually have to be a programmer. You can build an app. And we actually thought we were onto something. And if you view it through a business lens, this is why I love this example. Through a business lens, we look crazy. We know that we're not going to launch it till the end of this year. But we actually, in March, fly to San Francisco, do a full launch program. So everyone's on planes. Everyone's doing everything they have to do. It's basically a full launch, but we're not launching. Okay, so through a business lens, like, that makes no sense. You're going to for sure at least double your costs, right, minimum. But we wanted the evidence. We wanted to see now, does anyone like this? We wanted to gather evidence. We wanted to say, okay, we think this is a really good idea. And then when we came home, we got the front cover of Mac Life. We won Best in Show. So like, okay, let's double the capital now. Let's double up the team. And if you actually think about it, you didn't even have to say that, because everyone else was so excited. They're like, can I work on that project? Can I work on that project? And in a sense, it just kind of starts happening, right? You don't actually say it. It just actually happened, which I love. And so some of those people are like, you mean you don't plan, right? And I think we super plan. And if you want to go back to like business literature, Rita McGrath in 1995 wrote Discovery-Driven Planning, which is basically what we do. In 2013, she wrote a book called The End of Competitive Advantage, which refreshes her thinking. So I think those are great books. And the way stuff ties together is that the talent does services. The services is basically our paid R&D. This is where everyone gets ideas. Then those ideas go into the innovation hourglass, and that's our culture of failure or a culture of learning. Some people hate calling it the culture of failure. I think that's what it is, but really we're learning faster than anybody else. If you actually unpack what we're basically saying is, we're saying we're going to learn faster than anybody else, so there's no way we can get beat, right? So actually when you see all of our mistakes, someone else is going to make those same mistakes, we're just going to make them faster, so we're actually on the other side better. And the way that we think about this, so you have this idea of like hygiene. So innovation hygiene, process hygiene, is that you don't want to like save up for a year and then say I'm going to brush my teeth all weekend long. Right? It's disgusting. And so if you think about that though, so many businesses do that. Let's wait. We have our 18-month strategic planning cycle, right? So now we're going to get together for 5 days straight. We're going to brush our teeth about our strategy, and then we're going to forget about it for the rest of the next 18 months. And so our whole thinking is, if you actually unpack this, the way that we even write our software is this way. This is the way we think you should build a business, is you just brush your teeth, and you actually, all this stuff will happen in stream. And then what happens for us is that not a lot of stuff works. That's the other side. Like, if you think about it through a lab, not a lot of stuff works, so it has to land somewhere. So for us, it becomes our scalable stories. Open source, right? So the worst thing that happens when we make a product that no one likes, it goes up on our open source page, and it helps for recruiting. Oh, you guys do open source, that's neat, I really like that project. Maybe the market didn't like it, but as a developer, I maybe really like that, right? And so there's even a way out there, and then the whole thing they're always trying to do is rev up for our scalable profits through global product sales, right? We actually think planning is underrated, especially in technology companies, because we really think you're not a lottery ticket. And so the fact that we're seeking unprobabilistic outcomes all the time. If you actually think about it, when we say like, oh, the big wheel of profits, that's an unprobabilistic outcome. But we're seeking that, but that means that now, okay, fine, we're going to gun for that. That means like every step along the way, let's try to think. Let's try to take risk off the table, not add it, because the whole idea is already baked full of risk. And so this is what the outcome's been for us today. We have software, 77 million users in 169 countries. And we've had 5 global or country number ones. And so I just wanted to highlight this. And if you kind of just like pretend you just blurred that out, because people will look at that and be like, oh, that's interesting. You have clients that makes no sense. You have from consumer, top consumer brands, to total private software developed for enterprises. But if you actually think about it through our lens and you zoom out, we're trying to create entrepreneurial thinking. That's fertile, like food for them. Because that all of a sudden our talent see stuff in all these different industries. Hey, Tracy. See stuff in all these different industries, and they can't help but actually innovate through that. There's no way. They can't stop, right? And that's actually the point around when people say, like, is it hard to make people be creative or in the follow talent? Absolutely. That's never the problem. We've never had the problem like, oh, that person's not creative, ever. It's never been an issue. Actually, it's always in people. They can't draw maybe, but that doesn't matter, right? That's not what creativity means. So lessons learned is that none of the world's greatest restaurants are buffets. And this is actually one of the things I have to always remind people, is that if you imagine our founding, we were iPhone only for a very long time. We're iPhone and Android today. But I was like, until we're world-class at iPhone, why are we going to start an Android practice? It makes no sense, right? And so even though there's follow the talent, there's this idea that there's a strategy and there's focus. The other thing that we learned was that actually how we talk about our organization really is a tea leaves to what's happening. So this is one of the top luxury brands in the world, and there's a great article in Forbes on them. They talk about how they don't have a marketing department. And they don't have a marketing department because that's their whole thing. It's just like, I think if you have an innovation department or you have a strategy department, it may probably mean something. It means that's interesting. It probably means it's not actually happening very often, right? That's actually probably what it means, right? And so when you think about us, as soon as we have an innovation box somewhere in our org design, you know that we're not following the talent anymore. Because we actually were like, oh, we're not doing that anymore. Like somewhere we've messed up. So we actually think that the org chart is like the early tell of what's actually happening in the company. And so the other thing that we learned from an org chart standpoint was there's this idea of the decentralized autonomy and centralized autonomy. For example, nobody on the team wants innovation inside payroll. Okay? No one wants that, right? Just like how Derek mentioned, like pay has to happen, there's no innovation there, all that stuff. So you can't follow talent everywhere. We're super open to ideas, changing all the systems all the time, because that's so wired in our culture and our DNA. But really, like that's like harder gates to change some of those things. And the other thing that we learned was, even though we're kind of brushing our teeth all the time, is that you actually have to go to the dentist about every 18 months. So we kind of stop. So for example, this Saturday, it's our 5th anniversary. So we're stopping for about 6 hours to say, what do we think's happening as we're on this kind of path to double? What do we think's going to happen in the org chart? So it's kind of like this painful stop. We don't really do it. We like to have it all in stream, but there's this time to do it. And then what we try to do is keep the DNA the same, but break people's psychology. So when we walk into these sessions, no one has a job, right? So it freaks out everybody, right? So you walk in, no one has a job, so you can rethink, and everyone can be in this state of what the right spot for them can be. Because I might be the right CEO now, and in 5 years I'm the wrong CEO. That's okay. Maybe I change, I'm in a different role. And so the takeaway is that from my perspective, the thing that I wish people would do more and more and more is figure out this way to just even experiment a little bit more, or just have this idea of this brushing of the teeth easier. So if you have like a capital initiation project form that's like this long, maybe you can shrink it, right? And this idea, if you could just do this all the time, you'd be blown away of where you can get to in a year. Thanks.
That's great. Okay, I am going to ask Michael a question, and you brought up combining the humanities and the sciences, and you have a title called Robots and Pencils. What's the balance between robots and pencils in your company?
Yeah, so it turns out that we need more robots than we need pencils, because when you go to deliver the software, there's more work kind of like under the water with the iceberg. But when we're starting stuff, we've actually found the perfect mix is actually this 1-to-1 ratio, but it's really 2 robots with 2 pencils, because then they can bounce ideas off each other. So it's kind of this 4-person team seems to be the secret sauce now.
Oh, and that's how you got your title, Robots and Pencils?
Yeah, I was really inspired by CP Snow's talk about, actually it was more like, I was inspired by his talk, and I realized through all my past experiences that everybody got that wrong. Like one arm was really strong, like look at our engineering team, or like look at our art team, and they actually weren't balanced.
Okay. I'd like to open it up to the floor now for questions. Are there, okay, can we have, so what we'll do is somebody will come to you with a mic so everybody can hear the question. If you just put up your hand, we'll ask that.
So this question is directed to Michael. So you use the chemistry lab metaphor. Do you have an example of a time when something blew up in your chemistry lab?
Yeah, actually, it's all the time. like that's the kind of the weird part of everything, is that only people want to ever hear about is all the things that worked, right? But for everything that you hear that worked, there's like 100 or 1,000 things that didn't work. So all the time we have products. In fact, we have even other names for the company that are App Store accounts that are private names, so you can experiment in there. We're like, oh, we're not sure this is really an R&P quality thing, but maybe it should work. So we stick it into like a secret company. And we're like, did that sell? Oh, that didn't. Yeah, we were right, right? And so that's kind of happens way too often, actually. If it happened the other way, it'd be even better. But that's just the price we pay for kind of being in this reboot cycle all the time.
So, and I want to add on to that, unless you have a follow-up.
No, thanks.
Okay. Derek, what do you do when students in the classroom seem to experience failure or think they're failing?
Yeah, so I think, you know, the interesting thing that Michael was talking about earlier was talking about this notion about fail early, and we talk about fail early, fail cheap. You know, if you do fail early in a conceptual design process, it's better to have 80 ideas that you bring to the table and to try to work through those ideas. What we find is when they're too beholden to an idea too early, what happens is, like a paragraph that you've written, it's like, oh, I don't want to change it, I wrote that and it's great and everything else. So the team that has one idea comes forward and says, this is awesome. And then they go do a little bit of research and then find out it's available everywhere in every store, and they're, oh, well, we have no ideas left. And so they're really crushed, and there's just no way to re-ideate and re-innovate. So what we find in the classroom when we're doing our initial ideation for project work is to have them come up with too many ideas. We'd rather them to be flustered that there's just so much going on. But what you find out is that some of those are connected, some of those are themes, that they have a common interest or passion that they can pursue later. And it's easier to adjust a lot of ideas than it is to throw it out and then start all over. So we find that we're trying to get them to fail through too many ideas than too few. So that's one of the things that we learned really early in the process. So.
Okay, yes. Oh, sorry, there's a mic here.
That's okay, I'm loud. Here you go. So, how do you know, Michael, that you get into this trough of sorrow, and are you able to re-innovate yourself out of it? How can you deal with that?
So I think yes, as long as you're open to the signs. So this idea about what's not working, there's only so much you should kind of like push against the force before you realize, like, oh, I need to twist it this way. The reason why I actually like putting up the trough of sorrow picture is that if you think about, say, getting a degree at Haskayne, let's say it's 4 years, it's mapped out perfectly, and you know that like when everything's done, your morale as a human is going up and to the right. This is behind me, this is behind me. And so what I've found is that it takes these companies 3 to 5 years to really find their way sometimes. And that if I compare it back to getting their university degree, I can say, like, just don't let the morale go away because you're flatlined. Because really in a business, it's either working or not working, so your morale looks like it's flatlined. But I think you actually have to keep changing though when stuff's not working. Like, it's not supposed to not work. So that's the hardest part that I find, is that people will hold on to the idea too long versus, say, the theme.
I'm going to add something too that, Michael and I in our conversations, one thing that really struck me was, so many of our companies are focused on projects. So let's fund a project. It has resources, and so when it fails, you own it, and there's a resource thing. In Michael's company, maybe you'll share with this, the notion of failure is a corporate edict, so it owns the budget for these projects. So the failure exists at the corporate level, so you don't have staff and individuals worried about the resource problem of failure. And I think that's, you can articulate it better than I can, but I think
No,
that's
actually, I
an
thought that was
important issue.
genius. I want to steal that again.
Okay, here.
Yeah, Michael, how do you define failure? Like, when do you pull the plug, guys? Is it a customer engagement thing? If so, how many iterations, or what signals do you demand from the market?
So I think for us, we come that more from like an art tell. Like, if there's no tells, then there's data, right? So no one wants to work with it. No one wants to trial it out. It's kind of funny. I found that to be super obvious to people if they'll get out of the treehouse. So one of the mistakes we find in, say, technology companies a lot is I call it like playing business. It's like almost like, say boys build a treehouse and they write a sign that says like no girls allowed. What I found that happens is they actually put a sign that says no customers allowed. So they don't want to talk to anybody. So what we do is because that's just kind of a broken model. As soon as you start talking to people, it's shocking how fast you realize that there's nothing there. And so the tells are so obvious. I think the hardest part for us is if it's in this like Walking Dead state, right? You're like, oh, this seems to have something going on, but it's not really going up and to the right. So it's kind of this zombie mode. And so for us, we kind of tend to believe that zombies should just get washed away. So we kind of have a cultural bias there. Because we believe that the team has so many ideas. If you think about it we think of business runs on 3 M's, money, morale, and meaning. If you think about it through a team standpoint, we're better off to flush the zombie because someone else's idea gets a chance. So actually, from an enhancing morale standpoint, we actually would like to flush the zombies anyways.
Okay, I think we have a question right there.
Thank you. Hi, Michael. I intuitively understand the science-humanities connection, and I automatically jump to the industry that you're in, apps and cell phones and technology. In the last 5 years, have you developed an opinion, or do you have a context for how this model might work in a small company that's in a different area, like professional services or oil and gas, or do you have a sense for that? Have you developed an opinion?
I think so a little bit, because you don't want to speak to things that you don't live all the time. So error bars on this. But if you think about even someone who's in, say, professional services, they still have a story to tell. And when they can tell a story through a historical lens, people will resonate deeper. And if they have no humanities people, they have no stories to attach it to. So in the basic examples, I see it everywhere. Like, here's my PowerPoint, and it's just like PowerPoint, bullet, 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 people falling asleep. And so if someone can actually tell a story, you'll stand out in front of people. And I actually think that thread ties through everywhere. And it's somehow the humanities people have a different lens on it. And actually, I think that the engineering science people actually love that lens.
Okay, Derek?
Yeah, and I'm going to add to that because, I think if you look from the perspective of a market orientation or a customer orientation, take somebody from medicine. We all know that technically competent doctors versus the doctor with a great bedside manner. And I think that's the blending of the robot and the pencil within an individual. The inventor in their basement can invent 1,000 things, but if they don't have any lens to the who would care, who's interested, does the market have an interest in this? I think every company has this or needs this blend. And I think the greatest startups are the entrepreneur already, maybe for themselves, is trying to solve a problem that they have, that unmet need of, you go to Apple or something else, I need a computer that's easier to use, or I need a computer that's faster, just me. There must be more me's out there. I think that's the pencil inside an individual is being matched up with the robot. And I think that's where this notion of entrepreneurial thinking is this, it is the pencil mindset in business being applied to the technical skills of management and strategy.
Okay, I see 2 more questions for sure. Okay, right here.
Shauna.
Hi. So this question is for both Michael and Derek. I thought your idea about there's no more B to B or B to C, there's just human to human was brilliant. And I just want to know how you approach that with your customers and what their response is. And Derek, how that may change marketing and the way we approach that from an educational perspective.
Do you want to start first?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, in the business school, we have, especially in marketing and especially in sales, I think that for people who are learning material, I think the natural orientation is to know what I know. And so I know myself as a consumer. So the first place that many of you at the tables probably started was, what would this be for me? What would, you know, that consumer orientation. But we see the big ideas, if I can call them big ideas, that many of you had. It's when it becomes scalable, it's larger, it impacts society. And so it's no longer, who is this for? It's the maximum number of people who could benefit from it, which is society. How do we get it into the hands of society? Maybe it's B2B in that particular instance. Maybe it's, we have to sell this to the government or countries or something. And I think that's the same orientation, is we're just interested in what is the maximization of value of an idea. And that's really the language we use in the entrepreneurial thinking courses, is how do you maximize the value inherent in your concept? So.
And I think Derek's right. You got B2B, B2C, B2G, all these things are there. But if you actually unpack it, we think about who's forcing the claim on attention. Okay? So if you think about who forces the claim on attention, imagine even taking like a course. I know you have to get here. I know you want to get your MBA. Maybe you can just phone it in, right? And so if you think about, if I'm selling to a government, someone over here is going to buy it and then force it on 13,000 people. Well, actually, that's how the cop-out happens. Because actually, those 13,000 people hate that software. Who's there like, oh man, I love PeopleSoft. I love getting my expenses in with PeopleSoft. Nobody, okay? And that's what ends up happening, because someone over here said, oh, I guess everyone's using PeopleSoft. We'll use PeopleSoft too. Check, check, check. And then tick boxing. And then over here, everyone's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is in my world. So we come at it and we say, if you don't want to do it that way, no worries. We call it FIFO. So you fit in or you off, right? And so, because we have to stand behind our work all the time. All right? If we can't stand behind it, we don't want to do it. We don't want to give a horrible experience to the 13,000 people that end up getting deployed to. We just don't want to. There's work everywhere.
There was a question, I think, at this table. Yeah.
Michael, you mentioned a reverse pyramid in your company, and that the management is in the bottom. How do you approach that? Because eventually employees are employees, and they get paid less than the management. How do you create an entrepreneurial and mentorship-based environment in that scenario?
No, I love it. So actually, the two lowest paid people in the company are the two founders. We do that on purpose. But the vision for the company, and this is kind of like, this is a classic like mistake, is that we're going to make the whole thing employee owned. And we probably should have done it from the beginning from a DNA standpoint. We said it though in the beginning. We're just going to share everything anyways. But I had so many bad experiences with like understanding how to like manage shareholders. I was just like, I was broken. It's like my pendulum swung to like, oh, I'm the only shareholder. That way, no weird stuff can happen, right? I can make sure nothing happens because it's all just in control. So instead, we actually looked to a model like, if you look how I talked about Hermes or PCL, great Canadian story, how they've been able to basically make things be employee owned and share those rewards with all the talent and have this long history. Like PCL is like 125 years old. Those are our models. So one of our next moves to do is to take this thing that I talk about and then crystallize it into the system. So it'll look like it's employee owned.
Okay, one last question.
Michael, I'm curious about your approach to recruiting that talent. You reference WestJet, as I understand their model. They look for attitude and they teach skill. Do you use a similar approach, or how do you bring in that good talent?
Yeah, we actually, this is the other part, we kind of have that flip pyramid on recruiting. We actually look for people who are already who actually don't need to work for us. This is our very first part we start. Like, who's amazing, have 19 offers on the table, that's the person that we gun for. And then, because we want to have like kind of this like ratio of 8 to 1, so 8 very, very senior people to 1 new person, right? So when we're hiring a new person, we only care about attitude, because of course they don't have the skill set. But then we want to surround them so they can't fail, because there's basically like world-class people around them all the time. So we're actually trying to gun for the world-class people and then grow up the newer people, but yeah, they don't fit culturally and they're not into like the long-term thinking. Doesn't matter if they're world-class, we just can't work with them. So that's, for example, for us, that's like natural limiter of our growth.
So Derek, how do you feel about that in a classroom?
Being able to fire people? No. Yeah, and you know, I think many of us listening to Michael today, I think what you realize is that there's a new way to do things. You know, are we doing things the same old way? And in our environment, you know, we wanted to teach entrepreneurial thinking, which other schools don't do. I mean, many schools just teach entrepreneurship. Many schools don't even have an entrepreneurship group at all. And we wanted to do this a different way. So the first challenge to ourselves from Jim and the dean at the time and others was, you know, we have to be entrepreneurial educators. We have to create a different system. So to be able to do all the wild and crazy things we're doing in the classroom, we had to have money to do this. And so as faculty members to go, we're going to go raise some money to be able to go do stuff in the class, that's breaking the mold of, well, this is the only little budget I have and this is what we're going to do. And so it's through, you know, the donations and gifts of companies like RBC and others that we're able to do what needs to be done, because in some instances it takes money to be able to have great events. And so one thing, for example, that we did is I can only teach so much. I can only talk so much about entrepreneurial thinking. The students have to live it. But at the same time, meeting someone like Michael is going to be more influential and more impactful on any student in the class. So our students in our undergraduate class, every group gets an entrepreneurial thinker, gets an entrepreneur as an advisor for their team. Every single group has a different one. And if you think about our normal mindset as faculty or as business people, the first thing we would say is, oh, you can use the same people next term. But the reality is these students are competing in a competition to make a lot of money and to potentially win something. So they all need separate advisors. So all of a sudden the efficiency and effectiveness model gets thrown out the window and you say, we're going to need 125 advisors this year. I mean, that's an astounding amount of work to find people, encourage people, excite people, give them a little bit of wine to make them want to do this and some other things. And again, all of that requires us to be a completely different business school, but you have to be willing to do that. You have to throw out the old to be able to pursue the new. So when Michael on this YouTube video that ultimately will be out and talks about what it could be to work at a company and to be inspired, to be encouraged, and to know that it's okay to fail, but you're going to fail fast and you're going to fail early. And if you can't convince other people that your idea is an interesting one, then it is a failure. And so some of the things we teach in class about communication skills are important, and you have to know persuasive communication tactics. And here's the real model. If you can't convince people to get on side with your ideas are never going to go anywhere. It doesn't matter if you're as an entrepreneur or whether you're working at Robots and Pencils. You have to be able to do those things. So to me, what we're seeing is this is a renaissance of business education, in Calgary at least. What we're doing is completely novel and unique. The way we're teaching these classes, completely different than other people have ever taught them before. But as a faculty member, there's no life like it. I mean, this is the most exciting thing. Lauren said 14 years. I almost fell off my chair because the last 4 years of thinking about entrepreneurial thinking, it's like, I mean, I know I have gray hair, but I think I'm receding. I feel, you know, with the fancy socks now, I feel like I'm 20 and not 50. Like, I think that, I mean, that's the excitement. And, you know, what Michael gets to experience every day, something blew up, that was good. As opposed to in your company, those of you who are still on your BlackBerries, I mean, if that's the arcane technology, but if you're using a BlackBerry or a cell phone and you're worried about something that's happened at work, you probably realize, I'm worried about something that's probably not the right thing to be worried about. I mean, we were moving the whole company forward, right? That's what this is all about, this notion about entrepreneurial thinking. It's a fun place to be. I think you can appreciate this would be a fun place to hang out.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you, Lauren.